The next session is DJ Judge Jules and Ben Rush from AudioLock. They're going to be talking about online music piracy. I've got a whole thing to introduce them, but to be honest, if you don't know who these guys are, you really should. So I'm just going to hand over to these guys, and we're going to learn a lot about music piracy. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much.
Maybe the one thing I should add is that in addition to being a well-known DJ, for the last few years I've been a media lawyer, which kind of gives me potentially a different slant to what you were perhaps going to hear about, which maybe might make me seem a little bit more boring in case you thought you were going to hear raving war stories. We're actually going to give a kind of legal perspective, but over to you, Ben.
We can do the war stories afterwards. So yeah, this is going to be something a little bit different. Rather than just doing a straight presentation, we haven't rehearsed this, so we hope it's actually going to go okay. So I'm very much the geek techie one at AudioLock, and Jules, with his background in music industry, but also in media law at Sheridans as well. Hopefully what we're going to try and do is connect business problems actually with technology and hopefully solve them efficiently. So we're going to see how that goes. So first thing is, Jules, you just like to tell us a little bit about Sheridans.
Well, yeah, Sheridans started 60 years ago as a music firm and has now expanded in a number of areas. It hasn't attempted to be all things to all people, but it does. It covers the areas, rather than give you a great big spiel, it covers the areas that you can see in front of you. And I guess the kind of digital stroke, games stroke, cyber risk sphere, which isn't my principal practice area, mine being obviously music, is a very significant part of what we do. That's about it, really, as far as the firm's concerned. Okay. I think some of you inevitably will use us.
Okay, well, AudioLock, which David sort of mentioned I'm CEO of, we've also got a number of other companies in the group. So we've got the Global Content Protection Group at the top, and then, as you can see, we've got VideoLock, AudioLock, BootLock, and it kind of goes on. I think you can work out sort of how that works. So they use largely sort of shared services. So whereas a lot of other companies doing anti-piracy use Google as their source of data, we built our own database, which is called the Pirate Engine. And so the Pirate Engine has about 3.5 billion documents in at the moment, and part of that information comes from us scraping websites utilizing the import.io API. So that allows us to very quickly bring in and train new sites. A lot of these pirate domains are very short-lived because they're literally coming along, trying to get as much money as possible for a new release or content like films, and then they disappear again. So being able to very quickly take in that data and put it into the system is essential. So yeah, we're sending quite a lot of notices to Google on an average week, so 400,000 notices. So obviously, when I first came into the business and set it up, I was a DJ and producer back in the 90s, and then I ended up getting involved in technology and realized a lot of my producer friends were then getting screwed over more and more by piracy, especially as the internet got faster and faster. And so I realized we needed to have a cost-effective and automated method of dealing with this, because the only other solutions were very expensive and generally had someone sitting in front of a computer searching Google to find the content. So we deal with a lot of high visibility releases, like the Prodigy album that was long awaited, so we dealt with that and managed to get to #1 for them. And one thing that sets us apart is we actually download the illegal links. I was explaining to Jules earlier, so we find like a CyberLocker link. CyberLocker is something like Zippy Share. Google Drive is a legal CyberLocker, but there's hundreds of illegal ones out there. We'll find the track that we think might be one of Jules's tracks, and we download it. We actually look at that MP3 using fingerprinting technology to identify that it was actually that release, and then we'll send the legal notice. Because that's an important point. When you are removing content online, you are essentially signing a legal document, which does have comeback if you do something wrong. So what we were going to try and do today is to throw together a scenario, sort of real-world kind of idea of a scenario for a large video game company called Mega Game Company, and Mash of the Titans is a release that they've got out. And what we wanted to sort of look at is, from the business point of view, what problems would they actually have that they would come to Sheridans to speak to them, and then really technology that can be sort of mashed together to provide solutions that then enable the law basically to take over and solve it. So Jules, if you can tell us a little bit about sort of why the brand has these issues.
Well, one of our clients is a very large and well-respected game company, and the larger and more respected you are, the more assets you have that need protecting. The game being the obvious asset, but of course your trademark, your branding, and of course the ancillary revenue generators like merchandising. In the case of the larger and more identifiable brands, the infringements take place on all levels, from literally going to Camden Market and seeing fake merch, which is available also via all the obvious channels such as Amazon, eBay, through to an assortment of sites, some of which attempt to allow downloading, some of which are ad-funded, some of which are credit card funded, all of which are difficult to access. Customers are ultimately deceived, and it doesn't really matter what type of brand you've got. If you lose control of that brand, then anarchy prevails. And I think in the case of the biggest client I've worked on in this area, it wasn't so much about lost revenue, it was about lost control, because it was just getting utterly out of hand.
And obviously they've invested over the years a lot into their brand, so they've installed a lot of value, and that is the value that goes along with the company and is important obviously to shareholders who are sort of looking at the company in the future.
Yes, I mean I think that goes without saying. I mean, trademark infringement is, I don't think we need to go into much further detail. I mean, if anybody's sort of interested, you can always ask us afterwards, but I think it's fairly clear what trademark infringement is. It needs to be used in a commercial context. There needs to be a use of that brand. You need to make sure that you've registered either the name or the logo or both. If you're a large entity with a brand that's worth protecting, clearly you need to look at both areas of those. Trademark law is governed by international convention, therefore there's an element of unregistered trademark protection in jurisdictions that you haven't registered in, even if you've registered in some. But if you're running a bigger entity, it's very sensible to register your mark in all the key jurisdictions, being the US, Europe, obviously, Japan, Brazil, et al.
You find, particularly with these sort of large brands and a large sort of release of a new game that's particularly anticipated coming out, is you get companies producing their own little online versions of games, using the brand to leverage and get people to sort of play these little previews and things that generate revenue for them. So they really are leveraging all the effort and work that you've put into the brand in the first place. So I wanted to try and come up here with a solution, just mashing together some technology to try and identify potential sites that need looking at. Because otherwise, from Jules' point of view, you've got a huge number of websites, and you need to whittle it down to ones that actually potentially have the infringements on there so that you can then target them efficiently. So we can start here with using Google CSE, which is their API for searching Google, like you do a normal web search, but it's done at the API level. So we can then use just metadata to search for a range of sites that can then come through. So we've got a list of URLs from there. We can then also use the reverse image search. So you can take the logo of the brand or any other sort of derivative logos as well that perhaps been trademarked. You can put those into Google's image search, and it'll come back with more URLs that host that image on there. It's not the best search, but it'll certainly get you some more data there to work with. So now we've got a huge number of websites potentially. Some of them are infringing, some of them not, and we now need to try and whittle that down. So one of the things that we can do here is we can, with Phantom.js, that's the little guy on the right there. So with Phantom.js is a great way of scraping data from a website. So you can get a web shot of exactly what you would see in a browser, but you can also take down the full HTML. That's the rendered HTML after JavaScript has done all of its work as well. And any iframes and things that are in the page. So you've got a whole imprint of all of the HTML of the web page and the web shot. And what we can then do is we can use things like the logos that we've got as assets from the trademarks and from the company to actually analyze the web shot to see, does that actually exist in there? So we can get a tick in the box to say this does actually have the logo on the page. So using that data point, that's that one tick. But then we can look at certain keywords in the page. So we're looking for perhaps use of the sort of trademark brand name, any other sort of words that might sort of help indicate that this has that content on there or related content. We also can use other keywords to try and determine, is it potentially a pirate site? So looking for certain sort of things on there, like names of what are called release groups, or actually asking for money, those sorts of things can all be recorded and brought in as well. We can also have a look at now our shorter list and analyze all of the domain information. So there's loads of APIs out there that allow you to interrogate a domain to work out who the registered owner is, potentially who the registrar is as well. You can obviously get the IP address that's presented to you for when you're resolving the domain name. On that IP, you can try and work out where it is in the world, which sometimes works, sometimes doesn't, depending if it's a content delivery network. But you can also find out who the owner of that IP is. And so getting all of this information together, we've now got lots of information about IP, location, so who's hosting it, registrars involved, any names that have been used in the contact information about the domains as well, and a wealth of information about all of those websites to try and help us understand which ones are actually infringing. So what we can then do is take all this information and we can then do some cross-analysis to try and find out of the ones that we've sort of said these are infringing as far as our tests go, what sort of commonality is there? Do they, for example, all the different domains have the same registrar, which is particularly useful if they've used domain privacy on the domain, because you can then look at, from a legal point of view, sending a note to actually request for that information to be exposed, which we'll come on to. So with our refined list of websites that have ticked those boxes and we've identified these are very likely to be infringing, and we've gathered all that information and broken it down so we have that sort of cross-domain information. So we've whittled it down to these are particular problem registrars, these are particular web hosts that are problems. What really can you then do with that?
Well, the law is ultimately that once there is what's called the safe harbors provision. Any, whether it's an internet service provider, a web host, a website, is safe from infringement provided they don't know about the infringement taking place. The moment they have actual notice, then they have to act expediently, which is a little bit vague, but that's what the law says, to remove that content. Historically, it's been quite difficult where it comes to web hosts, because you've got this kind of barrier of this kind of content barrier, which I think you explained. But the law's come on a lot in the past 6 months, whereby one can actually go after the internet service providers in individual countries. So, for example, you go after Sky, BT, et al., particularly if you had these blocks of related websites and you get and court orders are possible. It has to be said that this is in its infancy and it's still expensive, and I still sort of gasp at the cost. The most recent estimate in legal fees for a court order against the web host is about £14,000 in legal fees. But I do think though that estimate is based on the fact it was very new law, the more established it becomes as law, the more it will become a process, an unopposed court application, which is always much cheaper. As a kind of music lawyer who's involved with some of the trade organisations, I'm still, and music piracy is my particular sort of bugbear and interest. I'm very keen that the trade organisations actually lobby government so that that it's cheaper to do all of this. But the fact is, it was very difficult to do it before. Now there is a defined mechanism. If you've got a brand that is suffering significant losses or potential losses via detriment to its goodwill, then that sort of money does become justifiable.
And quite often, a lot of these websites are set up very quickly by often the same person. And quite often, again, they're a bit lazy. They use the same web host that they feel they've got a bit of a safe harbour with. And in the UK, there's the National Fraud Intelligence Bureau who help you sort of tackle this particular side. But it's interesting in a way, there's also technologies which are out there and we would see as helpful. So there's a company called Cloudflare who's based in the States, and they provide a content delivery network with all sorts of other clever little features like sort of anti-scraping technology and security features that you can put onto your website. So if you've got a WordPress website, you can very quickly put this onto it, and suddenly you can deliver to a global audience. And they have a freemium option as well. Problem is, this has become very attractive, of course, to pirates, because they get a little virtual web server, chuck WordPress on there with the pirate content on there, put Cloudflare as a layer above that. Suddenly they can, A, deliver to the world, but also they're hiding behind this security layer. And you actually have to contact Cloudflare with proof of infringement before they'll actually give you information about the web host behind there, and then you've got to try and tackle them as well. So it's this sort of continual process, and of course people can move around quite easily. And
unfortunately, most of the web hosts thus far insist on a court order before they will before they'll reveal that information, although that's not quite as expensive to procure.
So it certainly makes it prohibitive and difficult to actually sort of tackle it, which is why one of the main things that we do is try to, A, get things taken down from a particular host, or we try and reduce access to websites by removing the links from Google as well. So just as we got to this point, just wonder if there's any particular questions about either the technology or the legal aspect or the scenario at all so far. So if you've got a question at all, if you just stick your hand up in the air. Anyone? No? Quiet audience? Oh, there's one just behind you there. Literally right behind you. There we go.
I'll ask the question since no one else has.
Okay.
You are going after people who are ignoring and contravening terms and conditions and breaking copyright law. You are doing so by creating a piracy database that is scraping content of websites on the internet. This kind of scraping, for some of the websites, contravenes the terms and conditions on those websites.
This is a hypothetical scenario to start with, but yes, it is very true.
In the process of downloading the content to see what it actually contains, you can very easily be downloading onto your systems copyrighted content for which you do not own copyright and neither do your clients. So it seems
that's not true.
like
No,
you're
not true.
going after people who are breaking terms and conditions by possibly breaking other people's terms and conditions. How does this really work?
Well, in response to your second question, all the services offering what AudioLock do are instructed by the owners of the copyright. Yeah. So the actual download process, again hypothetically, isn't infringement because you're doing it with the consent of those entities. The first question you'd have to ask.
We're authorised as well by the associations, not just the individuals. So actually, it does cover such a large content that is not such an issue. But in practice, yeah, it would be a problem if you didn't have that kind of authorisation.
Yeah, it's not speculative. It's done in response to a complaint by a particular owner of assets or copyright. You're going after. It's not just fishing for infringement as a whole. Although from an artistic point of view, I wish one could just do it, sweep them all up. But
it
clearly
comes down to sort of the same issues where sort of Google was indexing books. So it'd give you sort of the synopsis of a book taken from the first few pages, that sort of thing. It was indexing into their databases where Google is indexing websites and scraping the data as well. That in some cases would sort of contravene. And so it is a complex world out there.
I want to be clear about the question I'm posing because otherwise it's sometimes easy to lose the subtlety. The difference between what Google and you are doing is that for Google, if I put a no robots file, Google will not index the content. I'm not so sure about what companies like yourselves do.
If you didn't have the authority, then it is a problem, but we say authorised by the wider content owners that allows us to do that. But it is, very interesting. So part of it is almost like you can't peer into it to see that they are being pirated, even though they are, without doing it in the first place. So it is problematic. Yeah.
I mean, to state the practically obvious, nobody's come back complaining about it because they don't have a leg to stand on.
It's very true. Any other questions before we move on? No? Okay. Right, so the second part of the solution here is the scanning and takedown side of it. So we, as I said, have a huge database of the pirate content that we're analysing and processing. So here is where we actually will identify, as we just talked about, so from a meta point of view, and then actually doing fingerprinting or a whole host of other ways of detecting and confirming that the content is what we thought it was. Now, we go further than that, though, is that when people make a pirate copy of something, they're trying to make money out of it. Now, at the moment, Jules has got a new album out, and if you haven't bought it, it's available on iTunes, which is the Trance Anthems compilation. But if that ends up online and pirates trying to make money out of it, they will put it up onto, as I said, these things called cyberlockers. So if I'm a pirate, I take a copy of the release, I put it up on a CyberLocker, and then I put as many links out on forums and places as possible. Now, I will get paid 6p every single download of that content. So very quickly, that generates quite a lot of money for me, especially if I spend a little time writing a bit of software to do it automatically and take lots of different releases and push it out there. But the guys actually doing this to try and drive, particularly on the film side, they create release groups. So like a release group, it's almost a brand. It's something that people go, right, I know from these guys, we always get high-quality films as soon as they come out. So that's what people search for on torrent sites. But you can actually have a look at inside a release that they make, which is a zip file. You unzip it, you got your music or your film or your software and game, whatever. In there, they have a little text file as well, where they use it as a sort of place to say a little bit about the release, but also talk about if you can get in touch with them, if you're able to get leaks of content, this is how to get hold of them. And they also say hi to other release groups as well. So if you get enough of this information, you can also get the creation date of the internal file, so you can work out when this pack was first put together to try and work out which ones were the first. But you can also see who's talking to who, so you can work out which release groups are all related together, and again, give you an opportunity to sort of follow it down the rabbit hole and find out, A, where it's first getting leaked and distributed on what kind of platform, whether it be the IRC, and yes, it does still exist for it, and or through particular websites. You can then actually go and attack those and try and make a difference there. So looking through those weird sort of little bits of data, which they probably have no idea that we're sort of poking around in, but again, it just helps you see what those relationships are, and you can sort of pin it on these weird sort of pirate brands. So again, it's the the DMCA relating content. You can start with the DMCA. What is the DMCA? Because that's what we use in a lot of cases to actually remove content from web hosts.
It's the law that I described. The DMCA is actually American legislation. There's equivalent EU legislation, and it is making a host or equivalent aware that they are hosting infringing content, thereby putting them on notice and putting them in a legal position where they need to act quickly to remove it.
As I understand it, that came out because of YouTube primarily, because YouTube was obviously a primary place where people started uploading TV shows and all sorts of bits and pieces. And again, they wanted to be able to say, we're a conduit, the users are using it, we can't be expected to check every little bit of film that comes along. So you tell us that it's infringing you, and then we'll actually go along and remove it. So that obviously works quite well for them, and it's been very much adopted, even though it's from the US, it's been adopted globally. A lot of the web hosts and cyberlockers, they all sort of kind of adhere to this. And again, there's one of those sort of words in there that they have to remove the content within a reasonable time, which seems to be about sort of 24 hours for some of them, and some are instant. But again, these hosts, they're sort of skirting, very close to the edge of law, and it is very hard in some cases to get these companies shut down. But again, it's gathering all of this data and trying to analyze it. A recent example is, so with a CyberLocker, they don't allow it to be indexed. And so there was a project that I was aware of where you couldn't go to the site and work out, there was no search, there was no way to have a look to see actually what was there. So instead, it was a project which did involve some stuff to do with Google. So they were looking for links on websites that linked back to content on it. And they say, looked at 100,000 links, analyzed what all of the content was to be able to say, has it largely got infringing content on it? Or as they say, it's pretty much all legal content. So again, they are able to use that to encourage the sort of the payment companies who took credit card payment to allow the services to operate, again, to sort of help put pressure on them, shut them down. So sometimes it's not a direct way of getting to the actual right person. I mean, you're all aware of the Pirate Bay and how long that's been running for. So the other things that we do is actually removing from the search engines. So we're actually talking about whether linking to a piece of content is actually a case for copyright infringement, which I think you said wasn't.
It's not similarly without notice.
But search engines like Google allow us to come along and remove links accessing the website. So while you can't always, as quickly as you might want to, remove a case of someone with a counterfeit version of the game up on a website, we can actually try and restrict the access to that website through sending notice to Google, Bing, and Yandex, and various other search engines as well. in terms of looking at the physical infringement, a good example is eBay. And Jules, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about the Vero tool.
Well, it's quite Vero is a process. It's a manual process whereby any brand owner can go through everything on eBay via keywords. In the same, it's a sort of parallel screen to regular eBay, but you can basically, it's got a tick box option where you go through and you identify infringing content. They will immediately take it down. The vendor has the opportunity to complain, and provided you're doing your job properly and correctly identifying infringing product, nobody ever does. But eBay is obviously a huge marketplace for infringing content.
And you get obviously, the copyright infringement, clones of the sort of content being up there, but I guess also sort of infringing merchandise and things like that as well.
Massive. There's huge volumes of it.
And again, this tool though uses metadata to actually search for it. So, say for example, they're trying to create something which is similar, sort of a play on words or something like that, something very, very close to the brand. And then again, this would be something that wouldn't be able to pick it up. So you could use something like import to scrape all the new listings that are coming onto eBay. Again, you can then look at doing web shots and analyzing the page, looking for very similar logos. So you can use OpenCV for that, which is a great little tool to play with if you haven't. So again, it's using the technology there to try and look at the bits that might be missed from the tools that are provided by the website themselves. So any more questions before we get into the last bit? Yeah, down the front.
How do you deal with BitTorrent?
BitTorrent is a difficult one. I mean, we deal with, do you mean just like peer-to-peer protocol entirely, or BitTorrent the company? Okay, so in terms of, like Pirate Bay and all of these sites all using torrents as a way of distributing their content. A lot of the index sites like Kickass Torrents is one, very famous. A lot of people sort of use that. I think it's in the top 5 sort of index sites. But they actually do adhere to the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. So if we send them a notice, they will actually remove access to that torrent, which is great, and that worked quite well for us. And it meant that there was only one sort of notice of it in Google. So one link to remove from Google, one from Kickass, done. So that was quite a good one to sort of deal with. There are obviously a lot of more rogue sites that index all sorts of things, and they're a bit harder to tackle. But they don't have anywhere near the sort of traffic flow the likes of Kickass do. However, this was then dealt with in the UK by domain blocking. So again, sort of a legal process was used to force the ISPs, really, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So by actually getting those domains blocked at the ISP level, which is all well and good. So now no one can get to Kickass unless you're not on one of those ISPs. What then happened is people thought, wait a minute, people want to get to this site. They're searching for it and can't find it. So of course they just made loads of proxies, little web proxies where they would put it in a frame and they'd put their own adverts over it and make more money. So whereas we had one link on Kickass, one in Google, we've now got hundreds of the same link all the way through Google, which becomes problematic not just from an access point of view, but suddenly you're displacing any legitimate content as well, which is getting pushed down into Google search. When people are trying to find content, it can make it a lot harder. So there's no really nice solution of just being able to stop it, but certainly there are techniques to try and help sort of restrict it, and a lot of the sites actually do work with you. Any other questions? No? Okay. Just very last quick one. Just want to talk about technical point of view, tackling the social side. So Twitter is a great way of distributing content quickly, and there's about 500 million tweets per day. So we've been playing with a good little bit of technology, which is Amazon's Kinesis. I don't know if any of you have played with this, but it's entirely linearly scalable. You just write a nice little Java program to do the particular process you want to do. And in this case, we took Twitter's Firehose, which is those 500 million tweets a day, and through Kinesis, we can actually process them in real time, identifying domains that we know are usually infringing, then whittling it down, those 500 million tweets, to just the sort of small handful of the ones that actually are infringing, and we're then able to identify them and send them through the same removal process. So if you haven't had a bit of a play with Amazon's Kinesis, I certainly would give it a go. Okay. That's us done. If you have any questions, if you'd like to come and talk to us afterwards, then we'll be around for a bit as well. And we won't get in the way of your drinks, so you can carry on with that. All right, thank you.